Right, here's another example with our kitty, and this time I'm going to create a tracking mat over both eyes, because basically I want to do something like blurring it out, right? I want to protect her identity. I mean, that's something that will happen. Sometimes you got some footage where some logo, some company, some trademark, or somebody's face needs to be masked away. And one thing you could do is simply identify the whole head, or maybe just the eyes to give it like the Cat of Zorro look or something like that. And what we'll do is, in this case, so we've already created the keyframe for the first and the last frame, right? Here we go. And you noticed I've moved this thing here to the side so that I have more detail that I can scrub through, more fine detail. This, by the way, was after stabilizing, right? So you see the borders are still kind of replicated from the other side or mirrored around. I can undo that motion later on. So right now I'm going to simply do the motion tracker assistant again, and you can see where each of the boxes go, the search boxes and the actual interest or block sizes. I'm going to keep them fairly large, and then have the search box small like that. But I'm gonna go only every 10 frames, or maybe even every 20. And the reason is that I really don't care to be very precise here on the motion. It's kind of on the outside of the eyes. I don't need to be very spot on every single pixel. So even if she moves a little bit, I'll probably have enough margin around it that I can do something about blurring it or hiding it or covering it up or whatnot. So let's go do that. And that way it doesn't have too many keyframes that it needs to be finding and securing. So this time, this processing should be done probably in about 20 or 30 seconds. Let's leave it. Seems like it's progressing pretty good here. Let's keep it in real time. And yeah, we only have what, about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, probably 8 or so points along this closed curve that are being tracked, and almost done. And there we are. So now we have a couple of keyframes, and we have a nice mask that's covering the eyes just perfectly, if you ask my opinion here. This one here might move up a little bit too much, so let's see if we can do something about just those last two. There's 2 or 3 keyframes we might want to work with. This one's good. This next one, still good. No need to change this, but this one here moves up. Okay, so let's adjust that a little bit. Let's go and grab this point and move it down. Down you go. Make sure we set this keyframe anew, and then keep going. I think that was the last one actually. There you go. Yeah. So now we have a much better scenario here. This point here, you see this point move over, but the curve altogether doesn't get affected by that too much. So that's good. We got a good set. Now this is a curve you'll want to save, right? Because there was quite a bit of time and work going into that. So let's go save it and save this, and kitty mask. I'd call that the roto curve for the kitty mask. So if we lose it, we don't really totally lose it. Now one thing we could do is just play with this, right? We could say, well, let's grab our current brush and or select a brush, a particular one. Here's a large airbrush right now. Let's take a very simple one, small or medium regular brush. And when you go and paint with it, this is what it looks like. Well, how about if we have that brush go along the curve that we just drew, right? This curve that's here. How about we just have it render along that? Well, that's something we can do manually, but that's not a good idea. It will take forever, because I mean, we could go here, right, and stroke the brush along it, and so we have the outline, and then we'd have to go to the next frame and do that again and again and again, about what, 614 times. Nobody has time for that. So instead, what we'll do is we'll go to the filter, and there's a new animated filter in version 7.1, and that one is called Stroke Path. And what it does is it takes the brush and strokes it along the path. The path is changing through the keyframes, no problem, it will render it all along. So let's go do that. In fact, you know what? Yeah, let's go do that right there. So stroke path, bingo. So last chance to say no. Okay, stroke brush along the animated curve, yes. And so what you can see now is that it's rendering the brush along each of the frames, along each of the curves in each frame. Now, why might you want to do that? Well, I don't know, there's a variety of effects you could get out of that. One is, what if, for instance, the brush wasn't a plain simple brush like this that just draws a black outline, but a black border, but maybe it's a brush that will smear it, or it's a brush that will, I don't know, do some other really funky stuff along that. So, in fact, let's go grab one of those heavy-duty smearing brushes. Let's wait for that to complete. We're about halfway done, 300 or so more frames to go. And by the way, we still have the original camera motion data, I believe, so we can, in the end, after we've done all this work, we can restore or reverse the camera motion. Basically, when we stabilized it, it saved the camera path, and it allows you later to go back and restore that camera path so that each frame motion can actually be put back into its original position. That's going to be an interesting thing, because now we're doing all the work on the eyes, and then later we'll want to have it go back. So now there you go. So here we got the black outline. And let's say we want to do a different type of brush. Let's go find ourselves a brush that's a nice smearing effect of some sort. Here, there's some effects, smudge, smear 100. That's a pretty big smear, right? That might take a while, but it's probably worth the effort and time waiting. So let's go and do the same thing here. Oh, and actually, you know what? Let's embellish it with something more. We have the curve, right? And this is the brush we'll be applying. It's a very strong smearing effect, but I want to apply that only on the inside, or maybe on the outside. Maybe I don't want to have it blurred on the inside. So here's one thing you can do. You can make this curve, this curve that we have here, turn this into the alpha channel, right? Use curve as alpha. So we now have the selection mask that you see here with the tracking mat, and we can invert it so that it's actually not selecting the inside of the curve, but the outside. And you can see the marching ants on the outside here too now. So the brush should essentially render just on the outside. Okay, and then that means the eyes stay clean. The outside will kind of smear. Let's see what we can do with that. So let's go filter, animated, and stroke path, and render that. So sure enough, now you can see that it's doing some sort of a smearing effect along the edges. That's one way that you can do some pretty interesting highlights. The inside is not selected, so the inside stays clear. The outside of the curve is affected by the brush painting, the brush stroke that's being rendered on every single frame. And there are some other things we could do. Instead of brushing along this path and keeping it on the outside of the path, we could also perhaps throw the filters at it, like the blur filter. Let's do that next. Okay, so here we have about another 500 or 400 to go. As suggested, as suspected, this will take a little bit longer because it's a fairly large brush with a lot of intensive calculations for the smearing effect. But it's all good to go. We probably will want to accelerate this a little bit. Let's wait until it's done and take on the next frames. And we are done almost here, 614 frames rendered. So you can see that the smearing effect was applied on the outside, nothing though on the inside. Now while we still have it that way, let's do one more, which is to go to the animation menu and let's see, what else could we do here? Oh yeah, with the timeline editor, we could blur the whole thing on the outside, right? So let's go get the Gaussian blur there, or motion blur. Motion blur could be interesting too. Just sort of a smearing effect sideways. Zoom blur. Right. Weird. Oh, that's an interesting one too. Look at that. Kind of a zoom center, but the eyes are not affected. Interesting. So, I mean, there's a lot of ways to use that. The Mystic Vision, Shadow Vision, or just make it dark. Maybe you just want to blacken or darken the outside. Let's go do color adjustments and reduce it to really dark. There you go. Yeah, let's do that. Alright, so render that. And that's just yet another example of so many things you can do with PD Pro by applying, selecting a curve that turns into a traveling selection mat, and then, well, do your magic on it. So let's wait for this one to finish. And here we're getting close to 614 frames. 13. Oh, looks like we might have dropped one. Alright, and so now we have this new video where the kitty eyes are still there in all their beauty. The background around it is dark. Okay, and then there is one more thing we'd like to do, and at this point I'll drop the curves and we'll just delete them right there. We saved them earlier, so we can always get back to that, right? We have them here, we can go and open that if we want to. There it is. But I'm not going to do that right now. I have killed the keyframes and the curve automatically, and what I'll do is also kill the selection, because now I want to apply something back to the entire frame sequence. And what that thing is I want to try to restore the camera motion. Alright, so here's this video, and I will go to the filter, stabilize under the animated category, and tell it to restore. See this option here, restore motion? Well, if you still have this thing here, you can go and restore it. Alright, if you haven't done other stabilizations, if this was the most recent stabilization and you had it in repeat mode, the border handling was not in reconstruction mode, you should be able to have the camera motion from a previous stabilization restored. Okay, now there may be cases where this doesn't work, but let's see what happens here in this case. Alright, and look what we got. We got the original frame sequence back in terms of the motion. Notice there is no more garbage on the edges. Let's go play it, or just scrub through it, and it's perfect. Okay, so it looks like we basically did not do any motion stabilization in the end. We have the full original video sequence in terms of the camera motion, but we were able to in between apply some traveling mats and do all sorts of weird stuff on that. Alright, well, that's it. Thanks for watching.